Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Fox. Can you hear me?
Lechem Shalom, I can, yes.
I hear you and see you. Okay, I hope your family is well. How's everybody managing?
Thank God, Baruch Hashem.
All right,
First day of homeschool is a little rough, but all good.
Okay, Baruch Hashem.
You guys are good?
Thank God, we are doing
Great.
Okay. Baruch Hashem.
Great.
Managing just fine. So let me just get this set up 1 second and we'll get started. Okay, Bruchim Aboim, everyone. Welcome. It's an honor to get together. Bershus, Rabbi Daniel Fox, the rabbi of Darchei Noam Glenbrook. It's been several years now that our kollel, through our broader initiative that we call the Midwest Center for Jewish Learning, has had the opportunity to partner with DNG in a whole host of programs, and specifically the past couple of years, we've had the opportunity as the kollel, as MCJL, to partner together for Yom Hashoah. And it's been an incredibly rewarding and meaningful partnership. We'll begin tonight just with one parak of Tehillim as we think about the people who are affected by the current tragedy. We know that Chazal tell us, L'shatif inish nafshi bahadi tzibura. A person should connect, should partner themselves, and nafshi means their soul, bahadi tzibura, with the community. So tonight, even though it's interesting historically, many Rabbanim and the Rabbanut HaRashit did not observe Yom HaShoah formally. It's either Tisha B'Av or Yom HaKadish HaKlali, which is an Asar B'Tevis, but there's a tzibur. So L'shatif inish nafshi bahadi tzibura, we as a kollel and a shul and as a community are getting together to be part of that tzibur in memory of the Kedoshim, the memory of the 6 million, Shem Yikom Damam. And in part of thinking about what it means to be part of community, we are feeling connected to the broader Jewish community and to the world during our suffering. So we'll start with one parak of Tehillim. Shir malos mimama kim karasicho Adonai. Adonai shema v'koli tienos necha kashuvos l'kol tachan hunai. Im avonos tishmar ya Adonai miyamod. Ki im achoas licha leman tivarei. Ki vise Adonai kivso nafshi v'lidvaro cholti. Nafshi l'Adonai v'shem l'boker, shem l'boker. Yachel Yisrael Adonai Kim Adonai Chesed Varbei Mofedus V'hu Yiftes Yisrael Mikol Avonosav Achinu Kol Beis Yisrael Nesunu Batzor Vashivya Hom Dim Bein Bayom Bein Vayaba Sham Al Kom Yirachem Aleim Ritzor V'yotzim Yitzor Levachim Me'afil Le'oro Mishib L'Gula Hashta B'Agol V'Zman Korivin No Mar Amen. It's a covet gadol. It's a great honor to welcome and introduce Rabbi Daniel Fox.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Rabbi Brand. And I really want to give a special Akar Satov to you and the whole YU Torah Mitzion Kollel and MCJL staff and team. As you mentioned, it's been our privilege to host Yom HaShoah program the past few years. And this year, I guess, like everything else, it's a little bit different. But I had no doubt, and you guys always come through with something really amazing and meaningful, whatever the circumstances might be. I also just want to take a moment to thank the wonderful speakers that you arranged for today. Really, really appreciate both of them being here and sharing their time and sharing themselves and their story. It's so important for all of us to hear. You know, I just want to share a very, very quick thought, but you know, every time I hear a story or I read a book or I watch a video about the Holocaust from a survivor or a historian or anybody who is you know, is well versed in these areas, I think it's incredibly meaningful, and that responsibility to continue learning about this only becomes more important as time passes. But nonetheless, there's always a little part of me that feels like it's so unfathomable what happened that we can't even really begin to imagine what it was like just by hearing. But at the same time, when I think about those who survived, and even those who survived lost everything. I mean, nobody made it out okay. People lost family members. At the very least, people lost their home, their belongings, their dignity, their sense of safety and security, their comfort, their friends, pretty much everything. Some even their faith. And when I think about those who survived losing all of that and yet committed themselves to rebuilding their families and communities and Yiddishkeit around the world, in Chicago, New York, Israel, wherever it might be, I find that almost as unfathomable and as unimaginable. the Mesiras Nefesh that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents put in to their lives and to the world to give us everything that we have today. And there's a medrash that says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in Maaseh Bereshis, the original creation, it says that he was Borei Olamos Umachrivan, that he created worlds and then destroyed them, which whatever exactly that means, on a very simple level, what we can learn is that Hashem imbued within the very creation of the world this strength, this godly ability for people to come out of Horban, out of destruction, and to rebuild. And we should all think about that and really be Makir Tov, appreciate those people who, along with Hashem, came out of this Horban and rebuilt incredibly. And I think this day is a time to certainly reflect on the Horban, maybe primarily to think about the Horban and the destruction, the unimaginable destruction that took place, and also the subsequent binyan that took place, thanking both Hashem and the people who partnered with him to recreate the world and to recreate Yiddishkeit. And thank you all again. Thank you everyone for coming, and look forward to a meaningful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Fox. We'll continue with the Kelmole, the memorial prayer for the martyrs, for those 6 million who perished at the hands of the Germans and all of their collaborators. El Mole Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Dayan Almonos Vaviyasomim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina, B'ma'alos Kedoshim Utorim, Kazor Horakia Mazirim, Linishmos Rivos Alpha Yisrael, Anashim, Nashim V'taf, Shenehergu v'shenishchatu v'shenechneku v'shenisrafu v'shenikberu chayim al kedush Hashem kulam kedoshim utorim ubahem geonim v'tzadikim arzei halavonon v'ardiyei haTorah ba'al harachamim yastirim b'seiser knafav li'olamim v'yitzror b'tzror hachayim es nishmosehem began eden tehem nuchasam Adonai hu nachlasam yiskor akirasam v'samod lonu l'chol Yisrael tzidkasam Eretz al tchasidamam v'al yihim makom l'zakasam b'schusam yashuvu nidchei Yisrael achuzasam v'akdoshim l'zikaron tamid l'neged Adonai yamdu l'gorolam yavo shalom v'yanuchu al mishkavosam v'yakum l'kitz hayamin l'chayosam v'nomar amen. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, defender of widows and father of orphans, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure ones who shine like the glow of the firmament for the souls of millions of Jews, men, women, and children who were brutally and torturously murdered, gassed and cremated or buried alive for the sanctification of your name. Holy and pure will they all, among them scholars and saints as majestic in Torah as the cedars of Lebanon. May the Master of mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of life. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. Hashem is their heritage. May he remember their martyrdom, and may their righteousness stand in merit for us all and all Israel. Earth, do not cover their blood. Do not silence their cries. In their merit, may the scattered ones of Israel be gathered to their possession. May the martyrs' righteousness forever be before Hashem. May they repose in peace in their resting places and rise at the end of days to life. Now let us say, Amen. We have a practice in the Jewish world that when we remember people at the time of Haskaras Neshamos, when we remember those who have left the world, those whose Neshamas are back in the upper worlds, in the other world, we light a candle. And many have the practice tonight to light 6 candles, which we have here. The reason we light a candle is because of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Every human being has within ourselves a spark of God, a Ner Hashem, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so even though our world is so much darker now in the absence of the 6 million and their lights, but we light that candle to remind us that that Ner is never gone. That light never dies. And so the memory of the people who came before us, those Kedoshim who passed away, as Rabbi Fox alluded to before, we're carrying their legacy and our remembering them, the Yad Vashem, that memorial that we have, is only a memorial in this world, but in the next world, in the other world, that ner is always burning. It's an incredible light. And we need to live our lives in that light, in the light of their neshamas, to think about what their life was like, what they meant to the world, and what they mean to us. So yes, it's an opportunity this Yom HaShoah to reflect on the destruction and the loss, but it's also an opportunity to remember their light and what their life was about and what they stood for. We have two very special guests this evening. Let me just see where our first guest is. Let's see. Oh, she's getting in just momentarily. And let's see if she's on yet. Okay, it's saying my microphone is affecting the volume. Hold on. Hang on one second. Okay, it says just keep it still. Hang on one second. Okay, I think it should be working now. All right. So tonight we have two special guests, and I want to introduce the first guest, who is, one second, should be calling in any moment, who is here on the screen. I'll just introduce you one second before the Rebbetzin gets here, and that is Abigail Schechter, who is joining us from West Rogers Park. Thank you for taking the time. And then let's see if on the side if she's here yet. No, not yet. Let's see. Okay, I don't see the Rebbetzin. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can reach her. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Rebbetzin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. We're glad. One second. Rabbi Fox, can you hear the Rebbetzin? Beautiful. Okay. Bruchim Habayim, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have with us a very special guest, Rebbetzin Esther Levin, Shetichya. It's an incredible honor to have you. I just want to make a brief comment to introduce, and that is that together with Lahavdil Ben Chaim Ben Chaim, the Rosh Hashiva Zatzal, Rav Avram Chaim Levin, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, the Rebbetzin and the Rosh Hashiva Zechron Levracha, they were the matriarch and patriarchs of the Telz Torah community and the community of learning that they established here in Chicago decades ago. On a personal level, I have so much hakaras hatov to the Rebbetzin and to the Rosh Hashiva Zatzal, Lahavdil Ben Chaim L'chaim. When I moved to Chicago 12 years ago, one of the first Rabbanim that I met was the Rosh Hashiva Zatzal, and he gave me such a warm welcome, and the house has always been open for me, and every time I've come, the Rebbetzin has welcomed me in like her own grandson, and I feel so much ahava and so much hakaras hatov for the Rosh Hashiva Zechron Levracha and for the Rebbetzin Lahavdil Ben Chaim B'chaim. It's an incredible honor to have you. I know you can't see us, but I hope you're feeling the welcome in our living room, because that's where I'm sitting right now. So I'm here in the living room. You are in...
I'm in the kitchen.
You're in the kitchen, okay.
Okay.
And we're going to introduce the Rebbetzin because she has had an incredible life story coming to us from a very unusual place. She comes originally from Europe by way of an incredible journey. You can't see it, Rebbetzin, but I'm putting something on the screen for people to see.
Something on the screen.
That, let me see how I do this. Hold on. Here. I want everybody to see something that I have, which I got thanks to the work that Baruch Hashem I've been privileged to do as part of my kollel experiences with the Illinois Holocaust Museum. So the people who are looking on the screen are looking at a piece of paper, a very unusual document that has scrawled handwriting on it. Rebbetzin, you're going to tell me what it is in a minute. It says Zawiadskini Certificate. It says on the top, Ginsburg, Mordech, Ginsburg, Zlata Malka, 15th, 1906, 1913. And there's a picture of a distinguished looking Rav, and underneath it is a distinguished looking woman with a baby who's crying. I don't know why she's not happy.
That's me.
That's it. We are looking, thanks to the Illinois Holocaust Museum, thank you, Rebbetzin, that's exactly it. We're looking at this Polish paper, which is the Rebbetzin.
That was our transport. That was our passport, so to speak, to get out of Poland.
Exactly. So I'm looking at it. You can actually see, for those who are looking on the screen, you can see the Rebetzin's transit visa seen for the journey through Japan. It says to Curacao and other Netherlands colonies. It was at that time that the Japanese consulate permitted Jews to travel through Japan to Curacao, which was a long story about the various yeshiva baruchim who got there connected. And these are the Rebetzin's papers. And it's a kavod gadol to introduce the Rebbetzin to our community, to the whole kihila, to thank you, to bless you with arichas yamim. Maybe, Rebbetzin, you could start and tell us a little bit about, we see the pictures of your parents on the screen here. Tell us a little bit about your parents, please.
Okay, so I wrote up something, and I hope it's what you want. Okay, let me start. Good evening, and thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Rabbi Brand, for giving me the opportunity to share my life history with you and so many people that are listening to me. My family is Litvaks, which means we come from Lithuania, or so-called Lita. Lithuania was a small, poor country bordering Poland that produced great Talmidei Chachamim and great Mosdos HaChinuch. The Litvish people were very poor, as my mother would always tell me, "Essen gewen was zu tun." There was nothing to do. My grandfather, Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, learned in Radin by the Chafetz Chaim. And then, after learning in Radin, he went to the Kelmer Talmud Torah. The Kelmer Talmud Torah was famous as a base Musar. Maybe you want to explain to them what Musar is?
Sure. Thank you, Rebbetzin. So
give yourself 2 minutes, explain to them what Musar is.
Okay. So in the Lithuanian yeshiva world, in the wake of the Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and some of his Talmidim in the 19th century, there became a huge movement. Although at the beginning it was controversial, there was a huge movement for Bnei Yeshiva and for the general community to focus on personal ethical development. What does it mean to be a mensch? Was meint a mensch? That's
good.
That's Musar.
The head of the Kelmer Talmud Torah was the Alter from Kelm. My grandfather's Rebbe was Reb Hirsch Brody, who died young. His wife, Nechama Liba, was the daughter of the Alter from Kelm. She lived long enough to be carried on a stool by the other Jews of Kelm to the forest where the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, killed all the Jews of Kelm. My grandfather got married in Kelm to my maternal grandmother, Chaya Melamed, and had 2 daughters in Kelm, my mother, Zlata Malka, and my aunt, Yocheved. When my mother was 14 years old, the family moved to Mir. That's the name of the shtetl that Mir Yeshiva made famous. My grandfather, Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, was mashgiach before the Second World War in Mir. He led the Mir Yeshiva through Vilna, Russia, Japan, Shanghai. When we came to the United States in 1947, and when the Medinas Yisroel opened up, he packed up with my aunt and uncle and moved to Eretz Yisroel. At the age of 70, when most people retire, my grandfather became the Mashgiach of Panovich, a yeshiva in Bnei Brak, to a yeshiva of Israeli boys. He did not speak their language. They did not speak his language, but he made them into Bnei Torah of the highest caliber. He served as Mashgiach for 20 years. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Rabbi, maybe you want to explain to them what a Mashgiach and a yeshiva does.
Sure. So first of all, the Ponevezh Yeshiva at that time, after the war, was the living embodiment of the dream of a great European gadol who survived the war, and that was Rav Yosef Kahaneman. Rav Kahaneman decided that even though everything had been destroyed in Europe, he could still rebuild. The world the world of Torah would and could be rebuilt. So he single-handedly built this Ponevezh Yeshiva, which became a citadel of Torah across the world. And Reb Chatzkel Levenstein was one of the most famous, influential figures. A mashgiach is someone who nurtures the boys, who looks out for the spiritual, emotional, and social welfare of the boys in the yeshiva. So he's not so much responsible for giving shiurim in Gemara, which he certainly could have, and he probably did, but he was also responsible, Reb Chatzkel, primarily for the development on a personal level of their menschlichkeit, making sure that they were okay and taken care of.
And he was also responsible, he had the tzuras hayeshiva, how a yeshiva should daven. Davening was a very, very important part of him teaching the Bachrim how to daven.
Yeah.
Okay, should I go on?
Please.
As the clouds of war started forming over Europe, Mir Yeshiva, led by Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, Rosh Yeshiva, and my grandfather, Reb Chatzkel Levenstein Mashgiach, decided we must leave Europe. Now, when we talk about the Holocaust, or the Shoah, or Churban Europa, we say 6 million Jews were killed. Among those 6 million Jews were 1.5 million children. And among those 1.5 million children could have been yours truly. So every morning when I say Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, that ends with Hashem Elokai Li'olam Odeka. Hashem, my God, I have a direct line to talk to you. Li'olam, forever and ever, Odeka, I will thank you. I will thank you for keeping me alive. I will thank you for letting me get married and build generations of children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And thank you for helping me build Torah with my husband here in Chicago. I was born right before the war broke out. So when it was time to run, my mother carried me in her arms, and my father, Ephraim Mordechai Ginsburg, carried one suitcase of a change of clothes and a few personal items in one hand, and in the other hand, he carried his little green attaché kit, a little green suitcase that contained his ksavim. Okay, Rabbi, you explain to them what ksavim are.
Okay, so if you see on the screen, you see the picture of Rav Ginsburg, Zichrono Livracha. So as a Talmud Chacham, he didn't just learn Torah, he was engaged in Torah to the extent that through the learning that a person develops over the course of their life's work of studying, you come up with your own insights, your own perspectives on different topics in the Gemara. And people historically, Rabbanim would write them down. During the Holocaust itself, there were many great Rabbanim who had Ksavim, and they are so lost to us. There was a great Gaon in Warsaw, was known as the Prager Eloi, the genius of Praga, which was a suburb of Warsaw, the Gaon, the Tzaddik, the Chassid, Rabbi Nachum Zemba. Rabbi Nachum Zemba had 10,000 pages of Ksavim, of handwritten notes on the Rambam and the Yerushalmi, and it was all lost. So for many Rabbanim, for many B'nai Torah, it was so important to keep that. It was their life's work as part of their personal chelik in Torah. So your father, Zichron Livracha, had his own Ksavim. He kept them with him.
All right, I'll explain that now that people know what. I like to use the word Ksavim because that explains it.
Yes.
Okay. My father learned at Mir Yeshiva from the age of 18. In his 20s, before he got married, a group of Bacharim was sent by the Mira Rosh Yeshiva, Reb Lezer Yudel, to learn in Brisk Yeshiva. It wasn't a yeshiva, it was just by the Brisker Rav. They would sit around the table, and the Brisker Rav would give a shiur on the blot Gemara that they were learning. These boys were the best boys, of course, in Mir Yeshiva. They would listen to the shiur that the Rav gave. Then they would go to their room, their boarding house, and go over the Rav's shiur and write it into a notebook. My father wrote a few notebooks. They were the Brisker Torah. These notebooks and his Torah was the most precious possession that my family owned. That suitcase traveled with us through all our travels until we arrived in the United States. And here in the United States, they were printed, and my father's initials were at the bottom of the Torah, and they are learned in all the Litvisher yeshivas known as the Brisker Torah.
Rebbetzin, I could tell you that I personally, last year at the Kolol, we learned Maseches Tumura. How could you learn Tumura without the Chidushim of the Brisker Rav, the notes that your father, Zichron Livracha, I did not know that your father was part of that Chabura, but those are very famous. When our Kolol, when we learn Zvachim, when we learn the Manachos, when we learn Tumura, that's the bedrock of classic limud of the Brisker Masorah is from those Chidushe Hagriz Al Hashas, those volumes that the Talmidim put together.
Okay. All right. Now you wanted me to say a little bit about the refugees, about my life in Shanghai.
Please.
Okay. For 5 years, we lived in Shanghai. Dirty, filthy Shanghai. But being a baby and a small child, growing up, I did not know better. No toys, no nosh, very little food. But that was our life. I did not know better. I went to a private school that was set up by the German Jews that arrived in Shanghai after Kristallnacht. And in the afternoon, I went to a Beis Yaakov that was run by Talmidos of Sarah Shanira that were married to some of the Mira Bachrim. They set up a Beis Yaakov school, and they would teach us Jewish songs. I learned how to read in that Beis Yaakov.
Rebbetzin, they were all Yiddish speakers?
Everything was Yiddish. All the songs were Yiddish. Everything was Yiddish. We lived in a one-room little room. We had a little table, a few chairs, and a curtain that separated my parents' bedroom. The only running water was in the hall, shared by 4 families. No indoor plumbing. One stove in the hall, shared by all 4 families. We had one room leading into the hall. My grandparents had another room leading into the hall. My aunt and uncle had another room, and then there was another family. We did not know better. I did not know better. That was our life in Shanghai.
Rebbetzin, were there any other families that had grandparents, or was all just refugees
No,
without?
no, I think I was the only one that had grandparents. We ran as a family
Right.
because my father and my aunt's two sisters married two brothers. So my father and my uncle were brothers. They were both Ginsburgs.
Uh-huh. And now, did you have other family who had stayed behind, who didn't leave?
Oh, not. My mother had cousins. In Mir, we didn't really have anyone. My grandfather had maybe some relatives in Varsha because he was born in Warsaw. And my mother had some cousins. I know she had one cousin that she always, felt bad about that didn't survive the war. They didn't have big families.
Uh-huh.
My family did not come from big families. Should I go on?
Please.
All right. In January of 1947, we arrived in San Francisco. 2 weeks on a boat with nothing to do. Blue sky and blue water. And I always tell my grandchildren, I don't want to hear the word boring, because I sat on that boat for 2 weeks with nothing to do. After a few weeks in San Francisco, we landed in San Francisco by boat. After 2 weeks or a few weeks, I'm not sure, we traveled by train to New York. First, I attended High School in Far Rockaway. Rabbi Avram Kamenovich, when we arrived at the end of January, beginning of February, he took us all to Rockaway. Rockaway is right on the ocean of the Atlantic Ocean. And people used to use those homes as summer homes. All winter, they stayed empty. So that was a good place to put the whole yeshiva.
So for those who don't know, Rav Avram Kalmanovich was a great European Gaon who had come to America. He was a Rosh Yeshiva, I believe, in Kamenetz.
He was a Rav in
Tiktin, sorry. He came to America and was very active during the war in trying to assist in the Vada Hatzalah and refugee efforts on behalf, especially of Rabbonim and the yeshivas, but in general of refugees coming to America.
Okay. Now, I went to High, which was in Far Rockaway, for about 6 months. They put me in first grade. Of course, I couldn't speak English, just a few words that I learned from the American sailors on the boat. And after the summer, we moved to East New York. I went to Beis Yaakov of Rabbi Levy. My father picked that school because Rabbi Levy was a Yeki. He was German. And he felt that there was good discipline and good order in a school that is run by a Yeki. So I went to Beis Yaakov, the Rabbi Meir, what's called now. There were 2 classes in one room. We had second grade on one side and 8th grade on the other side. Now, the teacher would teach one part of the class, then she would give us some work. We sat and listened, and then she taught the other side of the class, the 8th grade or whoever it was at that time.
Rebbetzin, have you ever tried that in Ari Crown?
Oh, would it work? Great. Would it work? Now, just to give you an example, my whole class was composed of refugee children. 2 of the mothers were American. So when they gave us vocabulary words, we didn't even know where to get started. The only thing that my parents could help me with was math. And then in high school, my father could help me with history. And of course, he never agreed with the history teacher, what the history teacher had to teach us. You know, he had a different viewpoint of world history. In high school, I went to Beis Yaakov of Williamsburg, traveled there by 2 different subways. Took me an hour one way and an hour the other way. I won't even go into that. Do you want me to go on about the generations? You want me to speak a little bit about generations?
Please.
Okay. We are coming off the holiday of Pesach. When we say Pesach, we think of matzah, maror, haggadah, 4 cups of wine. But the highlight of Pesach is the Seder. The family sitting around the Seder table. Our family was always blessed that we were privileged to have 4 generations sitting at the Seder. My mother would always come to us. My in-laws would always come to us. The mitzvah of the night of Pesach is V'higadata levincha. Tell your son, tell your children. Tell your children about going out of Mitzrayim. Tell your children all the miracles that happened. Tell your children about the makos, the plagues. Tell your children about splitting of the Yam Suf. Every generation has an obligation to tell the next generation the miracles of Mitzrayim, of Egypt. My father-in-law, Reb Lezer Levine, used to say, by Yidden, among Jews, there is no generation gap. There is nothing, no generation gap. In Akedas Yitzchak, we learn, Vayelchu Shnehem Yachdav. They walked together. Abraham and Yitzchak, father and son, walked together. No generation gap. The beauty of a father and son, or a father and the children, walking together to shul. The beauty of generations spending time together. Now, do you have a time for a story?
I would love one.
Okay. When I lived in East New York, there was, it's hard for people to understand today, but we lived on a block that was 2 family homes, all Jews. They spoke Yiddish. They ate kosher. I would say they bought kosher meat. They ate kosher. They spoke Yiddish, but nobody kept Shabbos. It's so hard to understand. Now, on that block, there lived a family that was 4 generations. The great-grandparents, I would say in those days, they were in their 70s. They sat on the stoop, like a front porch. In New York, you call it the stoop. And they would discipline everyone on the block. The next generation, the mother, she took care of the house, and the father went to work. The next generation was a young lady whose husband was a GI in Second World War and got killed. She was left with 2 little children. 4 generations in one house. I think of them when I tell my children about this, because today the older generation would be in some kind of retirement house. The next generation would be empty nesters who would be going to Florida 6 months a year. And the mother with the 2 little children would be called a single mom and would be tearing out her hair. And here were 4 generations. They all got along. They all lived together, and everyone was being taken care of. We, our generation, with all modern technology, are really not the beginning of creation. We have to remember that we are a link in a long chain of holy people that started with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our avos, and continues on until now with our rabbis and our Talmidei Chachamim. Our job on this world is to create Kiddush Shem Shamayim. We are a special people, and the world knows it, but we have to act that way and prove it and show it to them.
Amazing.
Okay?
Yes.
You want to add anything, it's fine.
Rebbetzin, just tell me, maybe just share with everybody a little bit on a personal level about your father. What was he like? What kind of person was he? Was he outgoing? Was he quiet? What was he like?
All right. My father was, my parents, I would say, were the kindest, most wonderful giving. They were giving people. The Litvisher people, period, are giving, no airs about them. Now, I just want to tell you, when we were in Shanghai, this is a story that I like to share. When we were in Shanghai, all the Bachrim, unfortunately, most of them were alone. Some of them had a brother. Most of them were single. And it's hard to imagine that the 5 years that we were in Shanghai, they really did not know what was going on in Europe. We were like in a capsule. We were in like a teva. We didn't know what was going on outside. We just stayed.
You didn't have news? You didn't have
no
news?
No news. There was no news because where are they going to get news from? It was during the Second World War. We we really didn't know, or else if they had an inkling of what was going on, no one talked about it. But these Bachrim wanted some warmth. They wanted some family life. So they would come to our house in Shanghai, and we had nothing to give them, no food, no kibbutz. So my mother would boil some water, and we'd give them a glass of tea. Tea, there was plenty. I don't think we even had sugar. And they would sit on the beds because we didn't have chairs. We didn't comfortable chairs. And some of them would sing, and they would talk. Everything was in Yiddish. They even sang Yiddish songs. My parents were makar of them. Then when we came to America, these people had to get married. So my parents were their interferers. They didn't have family. They had no one to walk them down the aisle. In fact, when one of the Bachman would get engaged, you get engaged and you have a bride, you want to show her off. There was no one. They didn't have family to bring her to. They would bring the collar to my house. I remember when we already lived in Flatbush, they were coming already to our house because my father was a very warm person. Now, when Reb Chaim Shmulevitz left for Eretz Yisrael, his wife and children went from Shanghai straight to Israel. He came with us to America, but then he went to join his father-in-law and his family in Eretz Yisrael. He set up the first shir of Mir Yeshiva for my father to say. So my father said shir in Mir Yeshiva for, I would say, a good 10 years, longer than that.
Wow. Amazing. Rebbetzin, it is such a covered gadol and an amazing privilege for us tonight to listen, to hear, to be part of your life story, and just to be witness to the kochos hanefesh, the greatness that you have, and that masorah that you are transmitting to us. And we thank you so, so much. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it, how much we all, the kollel and the community, thank you so much for sharing the time with us.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. Kol Tuv.
Tremendous cover. Thank you, Rebbetzin. And it's actually a perfect segue for our second guest briefly this evening is to welcome Mrs. Abigail Schechter, who really represents the next part of this conversation, which is the notion of continuing the tradition of what it means to take that legacy that the Rebbetzin was just talking about and embrace it for the new generation. Because Mrs. Schechter, those who know her growing up in Skokie and in West Rogers Park, I should say, and the family in Skokie in the greater Chicago area, she's not a Holocaust survivor, Baruch Hashem. She's from a younger generation. And yet she has taken it upon herself to be so active in the Illinois Holocaust Museum and in Ari Crown and in Skokie Yeshiva and the Fassmi Yeshiva High School, making sure that our children are aware of and involved in and connected to this Masorah. So I just wanted to bridge this gap from someone who came from Europe to someone who was never in Europe, but is finding the way to connect us to that Masorah. So maybe, Abigail, if you could take a moment, thank you for coming this evening. Take a moment to share with us, why did you become so involved and what is it that we need to learn from this Masorah?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, being a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, Holocaust education runs deep for me on a personal level. After my grandfather passed away, my grandmother lived with us, And we grew up hearing her stories about her hometown in Liska, about her families who didn't survive. I'm named for her mother, Esther Lefkowitz, Alash Shalom, who was murdered in Auschwitz. And of course, she told us stories about her survival and how she lived through the war. So growing up, this was part of our lives. And we traveled to Hungary, visited what was left of their childhood homes. And my grandmother called it a trip of Kever Avos. That's how she would call it. Went on the March of the Living. And after my grandmother passed away, and as my own children have been getting older, thank God, I began to feel more of a responsibility to pass on her stories, her legacy, the greater legacy of the tragedy, the Horban of the Holocaust, to my own children who, in their own family, still need to be connected in a more proactive way than how I grew up. This was reinforced. This feeling was reinforced when I read a really interesting book written by Dr. Niri Pisano, who's a clinical psychologist, who herself is also a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. And her book is about, I think the title is Granddaughters of the Holocaust, Never Forgetting What You Didn't Experience. And she did a whole, she made a whole, over there?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, so this book was about a clinical study that she did, which talked about how Holocaust experiences are transmitted from generation to generation. And of course, some of this transmission was very positive, learning about resourcefulness and strength, of goodness of human beings helping each other. And some of what she discusses in her book isn't as positive. Thank God for me, I feel that the transmission or my experiences learning about the Holocaust in my own family have been a positive experience, typical of children of Holocaust survivors. My father has always been so protective of my sister and myself, so loving. Of course, every parent loves their child, but my friends could even understand the length of how much he wanted to protect us. And in fact, they once played a trick on me when I went to sleepaway camp. We took a trip to South Dakota, and my friends woke me up in the middle of the night, and they told me that my father was there, that he had driven all the way out to South Dakota. And the truth is, it was a joke, but the truth in the joke is that everybody knew how far he would go and how much he did and wanted to protect his children.
So maybe for just a moment, thinking about what others who are our age can be doing to connect their children. For those who had grandparents, what about those who didn't have grandparents? Like, you obviously had such a beautiful connection, especially to your grandmother, and taking a trip to Europe together. That's an incredible experience. So how can we convey to our children, the kids who are growing up today, what it is that they don't have without having those people in their lives?
Absolutely. I think that there's a shared responsibility, whether you come from a family with a background of Holocaust survivors, or you come from not at all. They're going to be the generation, regardless of their family history, that has the responsibility to carry on the legacy of the Holocaust without having firsthand testimony available from Holocaust survivors. So that, I think bridges that responsibility. And I really saw this when I worked with the students at Fasman Yeshiva High School with Rabbi Kupchik, how life-changing and how they really took these stories that they were hearing firsthand from Holocaust survivors to heart, and felt empowered to be the link to the next generation, to their own children.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the thread that resonates with me and what the Rebbetzin was talking about, this same point of feeling connected to generations, that whether it's our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, or somebody in the Jewish story of a previous generation, that our children need to feel a part of that Masorah. And there are different ways to do that. The Rebbetzin talked about it over Pesach. It could be connected to a Holocaust survivor. It could be a myriad of ways. But I think that idea is such an important principle for us to convey to our children. And it's an amazing thing that you're doing. I'm sure you got a lot of nachas from seeing these boys interview the Holocaust survivors.
Thank you. They're incredible. There's so much hope in all of this. It seems scary to me to move forward without the advice of grandparents, the giants, which shoulders we stand on. But when you work with such wonderful students who across the board, all different sorts of learners who really just want to put their hearts and souls to listening to the he got to tell the vincha of the survivors to them, and feel like they can make a difference moving forward. And I think that is one of the biggest parts of Holocaust education.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time for joining us tonight. Thank you, Rebbetzin. Thank you to Gail. Thank you to everybody for joining us. It's that night of passing the Masorah along and remembering those who came before us. Their memory should be a blessing, Neshama Shef and Aliyah. And Emir Hashem, in their merit and the merit of all of our tefillos, we should have refuahs and yeshuas and the geula, so we can all come together to celebrate in person. Thank you to Rabbi Fox for hosting us virtually this time. And Emir Hashem, we should gather for many simchas. Thank you all for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Be well,
Good
Rebbetzin.
night. Good night.